Once we've warped our loom, which means we've put the warp thread on our piece of cardboard, we've double checked that there are no vertical lines of warp strings on the back and that all of our little tabs have the warp string tucked down nice and low. We're ready to begin weaving. If some of your tabs ended up getting a little bit bent, or some of these little pieces aren't sitting as low as they should be, and they look like they might be ready to pop off of the tab, you can add a little tape to your tabs. Just run a piece right across the top. You don't want to tape the actual strings. You're just taping the cardboard, and then just bend it over, taped on the back. And that will keep those tabs from moving forward and backward and keep the string from coming off while you're weaving. And this can just be removed at the end of the project if you're having an issue with your tabs, or again, if your warp string is sitting a little high and you're worried that it might come off of your loom as you begin. So to begin our loom, we want to make sure that we have our shapes in the right space. So you should have your star in the top left corner and then the triangle in the top right. This is going to help you figure out when we're going to take the material off the loom later on, which corner to start with. So you're going to begin working with your long yarn needle. This will make it much easier for you to move the weft, which is the thread or the yarn that we're weaving with, through the cardboard loom. You also need your yarn, some tape, and scissors. Any kind of tape will do. This is just going to be for holding ends. It helps keep everything out of the way, and it'll all be removed at the end. You don't want to use something like duct tape, though, because that might leave a little bit of sticky residue on there. Scotch tape or masking tape or something like that will work. So we're going to begin with pulling a length of yarn off of our skein. And I like to work with a wingspan of yarn. So arms stretched out wide and then cut. As you begin working, you'll start to see what you prefer, if you like a little bit of a longer or a shorter piece. So I've got my wingspan of yarn here and I've cut it off the skein. I'm going to take one end and feed it through my needle, which should be very easy because these have nice big open ends. And I'm just going to give it one tie to hold it onto the needle and keep it from falling out. You don't want to tie a double knot because you want to be able to untie that easily in a little while. So I am right-handed, so I am going to begin weaving from the right. It doesn't matter what side you start on because you're going to be working your way back and forth either way. So I'm going to start with my needle about halfway up on my loom, and I'm going to start with my needle underneath the first warp string. When we're weaving, we always do opposites. So we're going to start with under, the next string we go over. So you're going to alternate under, over, under, over, and you're going to keep working your way. And you can either, whatever works better for you, you can tip the needle underneath, or if you like lifting the warp strings to get the needle through. So if I tilt that there, I think you can see that it's under, over, going through the whole thing, one at a time, every other string. Once I've got it, and I'm sure I've got the pattern correct, I'm going to pull my needle through, and I'm going to pull my yarn until I've got a tail sticking out on the end, which is about 5 inches long. And remember, your cardboard is 5 inches long. So I'm going to take my cardboard when I've got a little 5-inch tail here, and I'm going to use my fingers to push that row that I just put in all the way down to the bottom of the warp. So right to the bottom of the loom, right to that horizontal line we drew before. Now I'm going to take this end, and so I don't lose it or mess up or worry about getting it tangled, I'm going to take it and tape it to the back, just a little bit of tape to hold that out of the way while I continue weaving. So I've just completed my first line of weaving my weft. Now I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to head back in the opposite direction. This time I'm going to do the opposite of everything I did on the way here. So I ended under the last warp string here. So I'm going to start back over that string. So I'm doing the opposite of everything I did before. So if I went over before, now I'm going under. If I went under before, now I'm going over. And I'm going to make my way down the loom, heading back towards my right hand. And then continue to pull my yarn through here. Now, when I start getting to the end, I want to be really careful. You want to pull the weft string nice and tight, but you do not want to pull it so tight. I'm just going to push this back down to the bottom again. You don't want to pull it so tight that it moves this warp string. Do you see how this one is kind of closer to the second one now and it's not lined up with its tab anymore? That means I pulled too tight. So a trick that I like to do, and I'm just going to back this out a little bit because I went a little too far, is I put my finger right on that warp string and hold it down when I go to pull that string tight. That way it can't move. And then you're going to take your fingers and push that weft string all the way down to the bottom, nice and tight. Now I'm going to head back for my third row, doing the opposite of everything I did for the second row. So I ended my last row over the first warp string. So now I'm going to head back under, and I'm going to continue every other string. Before you pull the needle through, you always want to double check. So right here, I can see that I missed one of those warp strings. So before I pull my yarn all the way through, I'm just going to back my needle up and make sure I didn't miss any. And you can even drag the needle down to the bottom to check and see if it's opposite everything that was on the last row. If it looks good, pull through. I'm going to put my fingernail right on that last row so that I can't accidentally pull it too tight. Pull my yarn until it won't move anymore, and then push down against the bottom. So you'll start to see them stacking up, and the warp threads are only visible in that second row. Once you get a few rows on, you'll be able to pack those rows down tight enough that you won't be able to see the little white dots of the warp thread. So again, I'm going to head back in the opposite direction, doing the opposite. So I ended under, so now I'm going to head back over. And once you get a little bit away from the start of the loom, it gets a little bit easier, I find, to find your every other string. So double check, make sure you've got the right every other set going. Pull your yarn through. Put your finger on that last warp string so you can't pull too tight, and push down so the rows meet. And you're going to continue that until you start to run out of yarn. When you start to near the end of your thread, you want to stop when you have a nice long tail that you'll be able to tape onto the back. So what I like to do is when I'm thinking I'm close to the end, I kind of take my yarn, wrap it to see what it would look like if I did one more row, and I still have a nice long tail here to tape to the back. If I did another row and I only had a short little piece here, I wouldn't want to do another row. I would stop where I am, or even if I thought it was questionable, and I would tape the old end onto the back here. So I've got enough to do one more row, and I am going to take advantage of that and do my last row with this piece of weft yarn. Making sure not to pull too tight, pushing that down. So if you are doing this correctly, this last warp string should still be a straight line connecting these two pieces to each other. Once I get to the end here, I'm going to untie my knot, take a little bit more tape, and I'm going to flip my project over, and I'm going to tape my end to the back. If this piece is longer than the cardboard, you could trim it a little bit, but you want to make sure that you're leaving yourself nice long ends on the back. You don't want to be taping little teeny ends to the back as you move, because that will make life a lot harder for you when you go to finish and hide all of these ends at the end. So for your second piece of yarn, if the first piece worked out well for you, that length was good, you didn't get too tangled around on stuff, you can stick with the wingspan. If you find that it's too much and it's getting tangled, you can decrease that length a little bit, but you don't want to go super short, because each one of these ends you're going to have to tuck in when we're all done, and the more ends you have, the more work you're making for yourself. So you don't really want to have too many stops and starts, but obviously there will be some. So I just finished my last row here, and I ended on the left side. So I am going to start back on the right hand side when I add my new piece. And this is because you want to stagger where your ends are. You don't want them to be all grouped up together on one side, because it'll make it harder to tuck them in and hide them later if there's less space to tuck. So I'm again going to start on this side because my last one ended up here. I'm going to tape that end to the back, nice and long. And by the time you're done, this is all going to be a whole bunch of tape and ends. I've tied my needle back onto my yarn needle, onto my yarn there, and I'm going to head back. I'm looking at my last row here. And even though that's not the end, I can still see that the last row was under, so I'm going to start back over. So it doesn't matter if it's the loop of the last row or the end. Just make sure you're doing the opposite of everything that is in the row underneath it. And then you're going to continue pushing down and pull, and then back. Now, if you had yarn that was a different color and you wanted to, oops, I got a knot there, add some, a different color stripe in, when you add your new piece of yarn, you could skip to that color on your skein of yarn, or if you have two skeins of yarn, like if I had red and blue, I could put in blue for my next piece and you could do striped colors up your piece. But we're going to continue doing this all the way up, whether it be one color, whether your yarn changes color on its own, or you're cutting out different pieces and colors and making different stripes as you make your way. You're going to do this under over pattern all the way till you get to the top of the loom.